Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today I have my full review of the Ontario Knife Company Cerberus. This is a new knife for Ontario this year, titanium frame lock, and I found this when I was really more interested in the new Carter Ontario collab that they're doing, but this actually looked a little more appealing to me. I like the design, I like the 3D machine titanium, I like the size. Overall very aesthetically pleasing, like nice looking knife. So I went ahead and picked one of these up when they were finally available. By the way, even when these finally came into retailers, not much was said. So this is a knife that's gotten not that much attention, and I think it maybe deserves a little more attention than it's been getting. So I'm going to give it some. If you haven't guessed by now, this will be overall a favorable review. There are a couple things here that I'm not impressed with, but overall they've done a pretty good job here. And there's a couple things that I want to point out that are really, really cool that Ontario deserves some credit for in implementing them on this particular blade. So let's start off with size and weight. Overall, this guy's just over 9 inches. So it's not quite 9 1/8, it's about 9 1/16 overall. And that's not measuring this lanyard loop at the end. I kind of left that out because it doesn't add, you know what I mean? It doesn't help you with being able to get your hands on the knife or anything like that. The blade here is just, and I mean just under 3 3/4 inches, not even a full 1/16 under, 5 3/8 on the handle. So that's one of the weird things about this knife, guys. Because of this like big upward sweep, they could have left this straighter and changed this a little. And even because of the way they did the backspacer, the blade to handle ratio on this knife is not that great. So 3 3/4 inch blade and a 5 3/8 inch handle. That's not a fantastic ratio. It is very comfortable in it, and I will say for its size, and by the way, this guy weighs 6.2 ounces, so pretty hefty. But at a 9-inch knife, that's really not the end of the world, and especially honestly, at this price point, for $100, I can't really take points away for not milling out that titanium. Okay, I just can't. So, yeah, if this were, $150, that would be a bigger issue to me. I would want a much smaller, slimmer backspacer and heavily milled out scales to save on some of that weight. But really, 6.2 ounces is not the end of the world anyway. The other thing that I want to point out, and this is what we always talk about here under size and weight, is that this is a pretty slim knife. So it's not overly huge, and you end up getting quite a lot of handle, quite a lot of blade for something that carries in pocket pretty easily, okay? And this does go into pocket pretty nicely, not very intrusive at all. So overall, size and weight, 3 3/4 inch blade, almost 5 3/8 inch handle, 6.2 ounces. A little heavy, but not really that heavy for its size, and pretty comfortable in pocket. Let's talk about the blade. Flat ground blade, D2 steel, sort of a drop point, spear point style, nice and thin behind the edge. This knife is a really, really nice slicing blade. Now I will say this, the blade profile here kind of reminds me of Spyderco knives, where you just get this totally flat blade that tapers toward the point, and that does end up producing a pretty thin, fine point out here. Kind of puts me in mind of the Para 2 or the military. In fact, the military has a similar issue with blade to handle ratio, and is also a kind of a long, slim knife. So there's maybe a bit of a similarity between those two, and even the blade shape being full flat ground and quite thin at the edge. Or quite fine at the tip is again similar to the military. D2 blade, which seems to be pretty well heat treated. I've done quite a bit of work with this, and it's holding an edge just fine. D2, of course, is not stainless, so I did put just a little bit of oil on here, and not a lot. Like basically I kind of rub it in, then wipe everything off with a paper towel, and that's about all I do with my D2 blades. And I've never had an issue, and certainly have not had an issue with this one either. So, and otherwise, apart from not being stainless, D2 performs really, really nicely. Now, I do want to comment a little on one weird little spot here. This sharpening choil is kind of cut out in a weird way. Now, I understand they wanted to get past that plunge grind, and I'm glad they did that, but it's just an odd shape and it's kind of got a hook to it. So I'm not, you know, it kind of detracts a little from the aesthetics of the knife, but it's not the end of the world. You know, this is a knife that in some ways I feel like if they would have left this, or even done a smaller, you know, sort of more gentle cutout there, it would have just made the knife flow a little bit better, just kept the continuity of this nice straight line kind of flowing into the blade. And by the way, same kind of thing with the thumb ramp at the top. By the way, the jimping on the wrong side of the thumb ramp, I still haven't figured that out. It's a really odd way to do it. It is very grippy jimping, and so it's really effective. I just can't figure out a purpose for it. And so I really don't know what to tell you about that. Otherwise though, I do like this blade shape. I have done quite a bit of cutting with it and it's very useful, and really, how could it not be? It is simply a full flat ground, you know, sort of drop point blade. That's a very, very versatile blade shape, and I maybe they were playing it pretty safe with that. Let's talk now about lockup and deployment. There are some good things here and some bad things here, and I'll try to talk about them all. The bad thing is right off the bat, the washers on this guy are Teflon, and that is not cool. Not a fan at all of Teflon washers. I mean, they do the trick, and when the blade is open, let me get a couple hands on here, it's really, really solid. So I will say, you know, I can't take points away for any kind of blade play or anything. From time to time, I'll get a little bit of lock stick, and that's, well, okay, let's explain this situation. Some knives, if you put oil on the pivot and that oil then gets onto the lock face, they'll get some lock stick, because the extra lubrication makes the lock engage a little bit too far, and then it causes lock stick. Now, and that's the case with this. 2 times now I have oiled this, and for about half a day or so after you oil it, you get a little bit of lock stick, and then it goes away as you clean up that oil. Okay. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And the lock bar tension is pretty stiff on this, but let me say that the jimping is nice, and the cutout here to allow access to that lock bar works pretty well. Thumb stud deployment, and the detent is pretty stiff here, guys. So let me show you. If I get some pressure behind on my thumb there, this will deploy with quite a bit of authority. The drawback to that is that stiff detent does mean that it's a little uncomfortable. Notice when this is closed, that thumb stud is very close to the frame. So I'm really got to kind of get the fat of my thumb jammed in there and apply some pressure. And when it releases, it does deploy quite nicely. But if you're sitting on the couch playing with this knife for prolonged periods of time, it's going to get uncomfortable. At least it does for me. Okay, so that thumb stud is a little rough. I would have liked to see that changed in a number of ways. You know, they could have relieved this a little bit to give better access. They could have just, you know, increased the height of this blade a little bit and moved the thumb stud up. Anyway, thumb stud placement is not perfect. And I guess it's sort of a result of the way that they have gone with this design. Okay, they probably could have moved this thumb ramp up a little bit and placed the thumb stud onto that ramp and gave you a little bit more room. Detent, as I said, is very stiff, but it does deploy really nice and quick, which is very much appreciated. Now, one really cool thing here is, 2 really cool things here are found on the lock bar. So first, if you look in there, you can see there is a lock bar insert on that. So that's something you're really not used to seeing on a knife of this price point. Okay, but the other cool thing that they've done is when they cut this lock, okay, number one, they've cut it really close, so it's super, super slim, that line, and I do like the simplicity of that. It's very elegant looking. But if we could turn this knife this way and cut into it, as you look at the lock bar, you would see something cool. The lock bar actually has a, you know, if this is the lock bar here that's supposed to move, and this is the frame of the knife, the lock bar and the frame are cut in on an angle like this so that it stops it. And so it actually, so the way this is cut, the lock bar actually serves as its own over travel stop, which is really, really impressive. And frankly, it seems so obvious, okay? I don't know why, you know, essentially all they did was cut this in on a bit of an angle, and the result is that you end up with a knife that you cannot, it literally serves as its own over travel stop. Really, really great idea. Works extremely well. And I've got to say, that's pretty impressive. Now, I don't know of any other knife that uses that same method of, you know, creating an over travel stop. If you know, let me know. But I think this might be the first knife that has done that, which is pretty cool if that's the case. All right. Well, I'll hold off on the rest of that. So two big things here, the over travel stop and the way that they've kind of chamfered the back of this lock. So you can't see it here, okay, but under there's actually lock bar sticking past so that you can't overextend the lock bar. And that, I've got to say, is pretty brilliant. Stop pin location is back here. Works pretty nicely, but it's just a plain old stop pin. Okay, nothing particularly special or interesting going on there. And the other thing to point out about that, the Teflon washers do make the knife nice and solid. So, you know, although I feel like I want to take points away from that because in principle I don't like those Teflon washers, in functionality, the action of this knife is really nice and the lockup is really solid. So, you know, I can't really say too much negative about that. By the way, the lockup here is pretty late, about 50%. But with a stainless steel lock bar insert, that's really not a thing, right? Stainless steel or steel on steel is not going to have the same kind of issues that steel on titanium is going to have. And the fact that this is replaceable means that if the need ever arose, like let's say this lockup got way too far over, you could request a new lock bar insert from Ontario Knives and be able to switch that out for a replacement. Okay, so that's kind of a cool way of doing that. And of course, you know, I think it's pretty well documented that that's the way I prefer that the lock face be done. Okay. Let's see, anything else about lockup and deployment? Nothing that I can think of. This is an understrain pivot, but I haven't had any problems with it coming loose, which is kind of nice. Let's go on to handle construction now. So this handle is 3D machined titanium, really nicely contoured with a backspacer. Now, I'm not a huge fan of backspacer construction, but you know, it's not the end of the world. And this is mostly open, so it's really nice and easy to get this cleaned out. One thing that's cool is this. These screws on a knife of this price point, my initial thought was, you know what, those screws are probably just screwed into the titanium. Then I noticed that they're perfectly across from each other, right? They're not offset or anything. And I'm like, hey, I bet you one's a sleeve and the other screws into it. And sure enough, that's what they've done, which is really nice. So considering the fact that even companies like ZT don't always get that right, the fact that Ontario has purposely gone to make sure you're screwing into metal there is pretty impressive. Okay, so that's handle construction, and there are a couple things there that I'm pretty impressed with. Now let's talk a little bit about ergonomics. Now, of course, the 3D contouring does make this more comfortable in hand. And then the jimping. So there's jimping here on the lock bar, there's jimping back here, and then there's jimping on the thumb ramp. And they're all very good, okay? They're sharp enough to really grab a hold of you, but not too sharp. Also, the choil here that's kind of cut out does nicely fit your front two fingers, okay? So that's something that we've seen missed before, for example, on the Curtis. And there's enough handle here that you really can choke down if you want to and still get up there, or even grip it like this. And the jimping back here on the bottom of the handle does lock you in back in this position. So that's really well done. Finally, even with this screw, guys, there is a steel insert so that the screw can screw into metal, which is again a win. And flipping this clip from right side to left side is just as simple as taking the screw out, flipping this over, inserting it here, and then you're done. This little missing piece, you know, that's not awesome, but again, for the price point, I really can't expect them to be putting an insert in here and still be offering this knife for $110. So ergonomics, again, very, very good. On the handle, I don't have much to complain about other than the fact that it's done with a backspacer, which does add some weight to the knife. Let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. Let's start off with, I don't have that many tie frame locks here. Let's start off with the Rat Model 1, since that's also from Ontario. There you are with the Rat Model 1. You can see that this is a pretty big knife. I would consider this a fairly big knife, and the Cerberus is definitely quite a bit larger there. When we talk about budget titanium frame locks, the Real Steel Megalodon is definitely a good one. You know, there's definitely a difference in quality between these two. This is pretty smooth, pretty high end, and it is going for about $100 more. But it is a good example of a pretty budget-friendly titanium frame lock. That's definitely a step up from this if you want to go that direction. If you want a frame lock that's kind of going maybe a step down, this is the Real Steel T109. Large stainless steel frame lock, similar size, similar construction, of course, being a frame lock. The looks are a little different on this, but of course the price point here is going to be much more comfortable. Here's a pair of two. I don't have a military anymore, so I brought this guy along, but most of you are probably familiar with the Spyderco TI Military. Great knife. And the other thing is, of course, a lot of people are familiar with the size of the pair of two, so you can get a sense for just how big the Cerberus is. I got another budget stainless steel frame lock here. This is the Rake Knives P128 SF. Again, if you like this sort of slim design, if you want a frame lock, excuse me, this is a fairly large frame lock, only it's stainless steel instead of titanium. The weight is not actually that different on these two because this is a pretty heavy knife. These two stainless steel knives don't end up being that much heavier. All right. So those are some more maybe budget-friendly options if you want to go that route. The other budget-friendly option, guys, come on, Kevin, I'm not going to think of it. There is a budget-friendly, there are a couple other sort of budget-friendly tie frame locks, and there's one in particular that I'm thinking of and I just can't. Oh, Maxpedition, there we go. The Maxpedition Excelsius, I think, is going to be a similar price point to this, although not as well done, okay? Finally, let's bring in a ZT. This is the 0850, not a great example or not a great comparison, but ZT has a lot of really well done titanium frame locks that you may be interested in if you want to kind of pay a little bit more and step things up a notch or two. All right, so those are the comparisons. Overall, what is my general take on this knife? Is it recommended? Is it not recommended? Is this a knife worth buying if you like it and if you want something of that size and shape? Yeah, absolutely. The handle is comfortable. The blade is useful. The lockup is very solid. So from just a plain old usefulness standpoint, if I want a pocket knife that looks nice and cuts stuff, this definitely fits the bill. There are a couple of issues such as the way they've implemented the lanyard loop with the pocket clip there. I don't like that. The Teflon washers are not cool. And it's pretty heavy, although not all that heavy for a 9-inch knife. So outside of those things, you know, this is a really well done knife. And honestly, at the price point, the things that are wrong with this are definitely things that I can look past, because I do think they've done a pretty good job with everything else. And of course, maybe down the road, this would be a knife that would be worth finding some phosphor bronze washers for and switching those out. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. That's my take on the Ontario Knife Company Cerberus. Really well done. And I think there are some things, although as I said, there's some things they kind of missed on. There are some really interesting things happening here. And so wanted to give Ontario Knife Company some credit for that as well. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.